Hi! Welcome to this part of my review featuring the Nightfell campaign setting for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. In this setting, the sun has died, and absolute darkness threatens all. If you haven't seen the other parts of my review, please check out the playlist in the description below. This time we are going to take a look at the Moon Goddess myth and the Last Sun. Mirithlen attained fame equal to her father during her life. Yet those she held dear knew her soul was troubled. Having wandered the dark mirror, she could not shake the feeling that her soul had been bonded to that world, and its calling grew more and more insistent. Yet, never in her life did she give in to the temptation of evil, and eventually death came even for her. Almost as if she knew her time was due, the Archmeister's daughter took care to transcribe her last will and testament, as the magic of the world was slowly leaving her. At her burial, she was mummified as requested, which was unusual to the Anireth, and was entombed in a crypt emptied of any of the trappings of her life. The remains were covered in silver, and 3 candles were put in the sarcophagus, just surrounding her head. As if enchanted, the candles lit in cerulean light, meaning she had premeditated an arcane ritual. The silver melted in her flesh, while the canopic jars vanished in shining dust, to the dismay of the sages. Once the coffin was closed and the burial mound sealed, songs emanated from within. Sung in the first tongue, by the pristine voice of a woman, they echoed across all Thurintian. It was not long before people rushed to reopen the crypt and thrust open the sarcophagus, only to find candles still lit with their mystical fire, while her body was gone, leaving in its place a circle of silver dust. From that moment on, the seats in the Great Council were placed in a circle to remember that event. The night after Mirithlen's funeral, the moon shone bright, and strange will-o'-wisps rose from the graves in all of Yurmen, reaching for the night sky. Lunar phases began to influence the world, raising the tides, affecting the mood of the living, and giving place to several other unexplainable events. In the Lunar Age, the moon remains unsullied. As Mirithlen withstood the corruption of the dark mirror, so too the pale satellite stands illuminating the material plane. After Thurinthian's fall, and the subsequent edification of Xivanis, only memories remained of the splendor of the first men, and so they were led to seek for the secrets of their ancestors in the depth of the earth. The expedition towards Thurinthian's halls filled the men of Xivanis with a desire to dig up the ruins. Under the stone and minerals, overlooked by a vault of blue lights, they reached what seemed to be the city temple. The Anireth spent months cherishing the collapsed walls of their buried capital of old, digging up the houses full of riches made of shiny stone and marquetry. They were driven by a thought, according to which the most precious of discoveries was hidden where the sages had long ruled, experimented and studied, in the place where Lagoran wrote down the history of Yurmen. Kriman was a wealthy merchant and wielded great power in Xivanis. For a few years, he had been literally buying his seat amongst the sages, taxing the public to fund his obsessive research. He longed above everything to take his place amongst legends, as Lagoran had done. At first, great enthusiasm marked the exploration into the cold darkness of Thurinthian, as Kriman's workers were astonished by the grand buildings of old. The general feeling, however, quickly deteriorated as a wrongness settled in the stomachs of the men. As they descended, rocks grew colder, and fleeting shadows wandered just out of sight. Some said the place was cursed, forcing Kriman to punish harshly those who abandoned their posts. His reason began to quiver, and his eloquence turned authoritarian, as he slowly forgot what sunlight was. After long months passed without any light, draining what enthusiasm or sense of purpose they once had, the leader of the expedition began to imagine that some dark spirit had become part of the place, and that it was bent on frustrating the spirit of men. When they reached the temple, that thought did nothing but foster his curiosity, assuring him he was finally standing before the power Lagoran had once wielded in his mortal glory. Criman went through the luxurious nave of the lost temple of Thurintian, alone with the shadows, to be sure he would be the first to attain the source of evil that had been calling to him. Once before the thrones of the sages, the darkness began to reverberate, and the whispers guiding his steps became poignant and frenzied as a soul-disturbing hum. Icy air took him by the hand to the pivotal point of the Great Council Circle and its 7 thrones. Yearning for power and deranged by evil, he followed every step of the instruction, carving his own flesh with foul symbols, until finally taking his own life with the knife used to carve them. "Death is the door," said a sinister echo coming from nothingness, as Criman fell lifelessly to the ground, without knowing he had torn apart the fabric of reality in that place where the veil had been marred and made thin in the First Age. When the few other Anireth brave enough to descend came looking for their leader, they saw the disfigured corpse of the old merchant bled dry. A roar made the walls tremble, and a low and guttural cry, almost a gurgle, came from the deep and rippled across all of Yurmen. From darkness, a shape made of tattered flesh and rags emerged, with symbols engraved on what remained of its skin. It was Lagoran, or what remained of his corpse, corrupted by the entities ruling over the realm where it had resided for so long. That day, the dead came back from the grave. Ghosts possessed the bodies of the innocent and unknowable beings emerged from the darkness, as the world witnessed the sun disappear in a cloud of burnt ashes and despair. Lagoran, in his past, had been a prophet for the 3 truths. No one had suspected he would have been the source of the 4th. And this concludes this part of the review. As you can see, a very dark setting indeed. Even the source of hope, Lagoran's daughter, she undertakes this very creepy, ominous ritual. What happened that day in her tomb is quite enigmatic and uncertain, and while she is the source of tiny light that still remains in this dark world, her father Lagoran is the avatar of absolute darkness. You have 2 opposites, although they are both clearly undead. Nightfell is truly a setting that you need to explore, that your players need to look into, unraveling the enigmas, the riddles, the mysteries, and the hard-to-accept reality of it all. Thank you for watching this part of the review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. In the next part, we are going to talk about the spiritual mysteries and cultures of the world of Yurmen. And thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending drive-thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and see you later.